One of the more intriguing developments in visual media is the increasing prevalence of the utilisation of the 4:3 aspect ratio. The 4:3 aspect ratio was once thought to be a thing of the past when much wider aspect ratios were introduced. However, in a culture where, right now, we're looking back as much as we're looking forward, it has risen in prominence again. I will attempt to assess why the aspect ratio has had this sudden resurgence in nearly all media platforms and how filmmakers are reinventing the way it's used. The 4:3 was first employed in cinema's infancy during the silent film era and the golden age of the 1920s and 1930s Hollywood, as wider aspect ratios were simply unattainable. When 2:3:5 was introduced in the 1950s, it was reserved for the larger scale films with big production budgets which would benefit from a more epic and literally widescreen display. Further motivation for the film industry to leave 4:3 in the dust came from the advent of another media platform, television. Television studios and broadcast stations are also using the 4:3 aspect ratio for their content, as film studios had done before them. This instigated a more than creeping fear within Hollywood that TV would kill the film industry and studios were desperate to quell the competition. So, a quick explosion in innovation was spurred to make bigger pictures in the 50s and 60s with wider ratios than TV. That quickly distinguished film from television, with the former offering a spectacle and grandiosity which TV and its 4:3 format simply couldn't match. However, past the silver age of Hollywood, the 2:3:5 would become the prevailing aspect ratio that nearly everybody would use, as it became more accessible to those in the film industry, and the democratization of the film industry as time went by, rendering the less cinematic 4:3 aspect ratio almost archaic in the film industry during the mid to late 20th century. Television continued to use the 4:3 aspect ratio all the way up to the mid-90s, only falling out of favour when high-budget prestige dramas such as The Sopranos and The X-Files took on the wider 16:9 aspect ratio in an attempt to rival film. After that, more and more shows transitioned to 16:9, thereby establishing the 4:3 aspect ratio as a dated format only used to a limited budget and technological constraints. However, around the start of the 10s last decade, the boxier 4:3 aspect ratio was resurrected by filmmakers and used for stylistic and aesthetic purposes. It's hard to trace who the first filmmakers to have this revivalist spirit were, but the most prominent filmmaker to aid the reintroduction of the 4:3 to the mainstream pop culture zeitgeist was probably Wes Anderson with his 2014 film The Grand Budapest Hotel, which, thanks to its prolific director and all-star cast, grossed over $100 million at the box office. Wes Anderson's choice to present this film in this way was motivated by the desire to evoke the time period in which the film was set, the 1930s, and effectively present the film as though it was a product of its story's time. The critical and commercial success of the Grand Budapest Hotel, one can imagine, intrigued and encouraged many more filmmakers to adapt to this classic aspect ratio. However, this new wave of retro experimentalists will go further in exploring what 4:3 could evoke beyond a very classical time period. For example, Jonah Hill's new film, mid-90s, takes place in the time period the title suggests, but Jonah Hill decided to use the 4:3 aspect ratio to create the same sense of nostalgia to the time period as the Grand Budapest Hotel. Unlike the latter film, however, mid-90s takes place long after the emergence of widescreen formats, where smooth and wide anamorphic lenses were at their most popular in film. So why did Hill choose this format? In order to encapsulate the squared visual aesthetic of the 90s, as squared television sets, computer screens and home video films were the main ways that Western society consumed content at the time, incorporating this aesthetic established a subconscious triggering of nostalgia and reflection, especially for people who grew up in this very recent part of history. This serves to emphasise the film's retro energy and atmosphere. Some filmmakers, however, decided that, instead of using 4:3 format as an instrument of inducing nostalgia, they would use it for framing and visual storytelling purposes. Two examples of this practice are Paul Pawlowski's Ida, released in 2013, and Paul Schrader's First Reformed, released in 2018. Pawlowski stated that for his film Ida, he wanted his characters' faces to dominate the frame, even in the shots that weren't close-ups. The 4:3 is the perfect format to achieve this effect, as the audience's view of the environment that the characters are framed in is obstructed by the black bars either side of the image, meaning their attention is inescapably directed towards the characters and their facial expressions instead of the world they inhabit. This creates a more intimate, personal and symbiotically human relationship between the audience and the characters of the film, which works for the slow-burning character study narrative of Ida. Contrastingly, in First Reformed, the 4x3 format is used to create a sense of unease and anxiety. The central character, played by Ethan Hawke, is a priest who is dying of cancer. In addition to experiencing a crisis of faith and, as the film progresses, he is gradually backed further and further into a corner. The 4x3 reinforces this by literally boxing in the character as if the walls are starting to close in on him, reinforcing that the character is trapped in his circumstances. This allows the film to emit a real sense of claustrophobia and tension, triggering empathy from the audience to the main character and his ever-worsening circumstances. However, film isn't the only medium where the format prevails. 4x3 recently has found a fruitful and prosperous new home on the internet, more specifically in the endless viral videos that are uploaded, shared and watched every day. It's almost as if the 4x3 is the format that the newest, visually driven and revolutionary technology is tested and birthed into, transcending and evolving from cinema to TV, now the internet. Bite-sized snippets from film and TV shows, whether from a trailer or a scene, are almost always cropped to a box-like and square aspect ratio of the 4x3 to be posted and accessed on sites such as Instagram and Facebook. It's ironic that a format that many thought, with all the new technological advances of the last half-century, would now be invalid, as now the prevailing format for videos posted in the most modern, revolutionary and world-changing platform of social media. This type of trend cycles happen all the time in many other platforms of art and manufacturing, whether it be food, cars, fashion or music. In all forms of these, art must evolve and sometimes take inspiration from what has already been done and create something new. From the birth of cinema from the late 19th century all up until the new millennium, cinema was very much a progressive institution. Whatever was the latest developing technology the films could use, it adapted and moved on until the new toy was introduced. From film formats, cameras, lenses and aspect ratios, it is only recently where filmmakers have looked back and rejuvenated old practices and devices the same way music and fashion have. But filmmakers have done more than bring back old tools and technology to recreate a look. They have actually improved on these old practices and made it a stylistic technique to convey a story.